we need to reimagine what the golden years look like, which is right now, it's effectively having your retirement from, this is a boomer thing. This isn't even a millennial thing. Millennials don't think they're going to retire. They think they're going to work until they're dead. But the boomers, they effectively think that with social benefits plus retirement, they should be able to spend 2 decades effectively not working, and they should be able to maintain their 1,500 square foot house on a quarter-acre lot. I don't think that's going to happen anymore. I think that the way that we, and maybe it shouldn't because it's probably, relatively speaking, antisocial. What probably should happen is we should get more used to extended family groups, living in properties next to each other, family compounds, all that kind of stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to be in tenement housing like the 19th century where you're sleeping with your wife and then your parents are in the next room.
Like Willy Wonka.
Yeah, like no, you don't need to have your, well, I forget grandpa's name, but like you don't have grandpa and 3 degenerates sleeping with grandpa in bed all day, 2 feet away from you. That's not what we're talking about. But at the same time, we're going to have to find a dignified shift to this. And this is where I'm going to challenge the fiscal and social conservatives in the chat. I don't feel they're ready to have that conversation because they're typically the people who are doing better economically. So they will still be able to afford that life through their income. And so they're basically saying, well, the rest of society can buzz off. But what I'm saying is that population collapse, immigration as a stopgap, and then the money distribution being taxed so heavily that we can still support our welfare state. These are meteors that are coming for our culture, whether you like it or not.
That's not true, though, because, again, we can look at societies that have higher rates of taxation, more generous retirement benefits, right? Well, I don't know how much Scandinavia taxes to fund their pension system, honestly. It depends. I was just thinking specifically about Germany, right? So Germany has, I think, 10% payroll taxes. Obviously, here we have about 6.2%. That's on the employee side, and then the employer side, 6.2%. In Germany, I think it might be 10 and 10. And so, we have examples of societies that have substantially higher payroll taxes to fund social benefits, right? And we don't see like, oh, the economy collapses. We don't see like, oh, so many terrible antisocial things happen in these countries because of the high payroll taxes. In the United States, right, we could do 2 things to fill this gap that you're talking about. So like Tim said, in 2035 or 2033 or whatever year it is, benefit, the trust fund is scheduled to decrease, right? Scheduled to go to 0. All that means is that the accumulated money from Social Security, the trust fund aspect of Social Security goes to 0. It doesn't mean we don't have any money for Social Security. I'm just explaining for the audience, right? Mm-hmm. And then if that happens, benefits go to 75% of their current levels. So we can still pay out 75% of the inflation-adjusted benefits come 2033, 2035. Now, if you wanted to raise all of that money with our current demographics, right, all you'd have to do is get rid of the cap on Social Security, right? So right now, there's a cap. If you make more than $150,000 a year, you don't pay any extra Social Security tax on any of that income. Very regressive way to do things. If we got rid of that cap, and then we said, we might have to say, our tax is going to have to go up on the employer side to 7% or 8%, right? We keep the statutory rates the same for the employees. We increase it on the employers. And we've solved this entire gap. And this is not calamitous. One second. This is not calamitous. This is not, a Great Depression's going to happen. None of that. And if we're smart and we just allow in immigrants, which we've been doing, there's 50 million foreign-born people that live in this country, we would completely avoid even the tax increase.
Are you familiar with the Laffer curve?
Yeah.
So that right there just throws your premise into question.
No, it doesn't, Tim, because the Laffer curve, the idea of the Laffer curve is you raise taxes to such an erroneously high level that people all of a sudden start dropping out of the labor force precipitously.
Not erroneous high level. An example I can give you that I personally experienced is in Cook County when they raised the taxes by 0.25%, contract labor left to DuPage County.
Well, that's because of an anti-competitive tax measure, not because taxes were too high. Obviously, if you have free flow of labor and capital like between counties do, you have to be more sensitive about your tax planning.
So you're going to need tariffs to maintain this.
No. There's no tariffs between a county.
No. If you're talking about a national employment tax, right? If we're going to say that there's free movement of labor and various different jurisdictions have different tax rates, then you've got a competition, but you need a 7% increase in labor taxes.
No. It goes to 7%. It's already 6.2%. Okay. I'm talking about like a less than 1% increase, right? I mean, this is not a calamitous thing that you guys are describing.
So real quick, do you believe in free trade?
Yeah.
Okay, so then everyone goes to Mexico.
No. Free trade is not the same thing as people can easily shift their entire domestic production base and their entire labor base.
No one said it would be easy, but why wouldn't they? If you're talking about a company that generates, say, $10 billion per year in revenue, and they're looking at 0.75%, they will spend that money and go to Mexico. We've seen it happen for 30 years.
Well, no. So what you're talking about is much more on the margin. Right now, we have a service-based economy, a consumption-based economy, right? So even if like a lot of manufacturing and stuff, we've already seen this happen. A lot of manufacturing goes overseas. It's not as if we've seen, GDP go down. We haven't seen recession after recession because of the manufacturing decline.
Let me ask you some questions real quick.
Yep, go for it.
You said we're a service-based and consumer-based economy.
Sure.
How is that funded? Like, what do we produce that generates the products to be consumed?
What do you mean? What do we produce?
Well, if we're not a manufacturing economy, what are we consuming?
Oh, well, we're consuming a lot. Well, a whole bunch of different shit, Tim. We're housing and, food, electronics.
You don't consume a house. Houses are hard assets.
Well, houses are an asset, but also there's a depreciation to a house because as you consume the house, quote unquote,
So
right,
you're
it
talking
goes
about
down in value. Because,
like lumber and aluminum and these materials.
Yeah. I mean, you obviously there's a. When I say you consume a house,
right,
I don't mean in some literal sense.
So we'll try this again. So we're talking about houses, and you say there's a depreciation. Houses need to be repaired. Someone's got to be hired to do that. Mm-hmm. This requires materials like steel.
Sure.
Okay. Well, we don't manufacture that. We're importing it.
Okay.
So what are we giving to these foreign countries so that they give us steel in return?
We're giving them dollars.
And what do they do with the dollars?
Well, they either invest it in, U.S. securities, U.S. assets. I mean, they do something with it, obviously, that you would normally do with U.S. dollars.
So let's bring this down to the root of the phrase oikonomia, which I'm sure you're familiar with, right?
No.
It's the root of economy, which means household management.
Okay.
If you live in a house where you don't produce anything, and you have a universal trade a currency for your house, I know you don't, but let's just say for your house, you're like, hey, if I give you this currency, you can come to me and buy stuff, but you don't make anything in that house. Repairs are needed. So you go to someone and say, I don't make anything, but I need steel for my house. I'll give to you, Mr. Chinese national who makes steel. You give him currency for your house. What he buys from you is going to be the rights and control of your house, your land, your properties, because you don't make anything to exchange. This is actually what we've been seeing in the United States with China buying up large swaths of farmland. We go to China and we give them US dollars in exchange for their labor. We then bring those products from China, and it's not just China, but largely China. They then give us, these are not just hard products, but also the resources need to make other products in the United States. So famously, like bicycles, for instance, they'll say assembled in the USA, but the metal's actually produced and manufactured in China and shipped here. So you think you're buying an American product, but you're not. China then takes those US dollars and says, hey, America is not producing anything. They're a service-based consumer economy. So what can we buy from them? Their labor in exchange. Hold on. Our labor is cheaper than American labor. We don't need that. So what do we do with these US dollars? What we've seen over the past 30 years, they've been buying up large swaths of our land and housing. They then rent it back to our own citizens. If you do not produce something, but promise labor or value in exchange for a resource, the only thing you have to sell is the clothes off your back. And that's what this country has been doing for 30, 40 years.
Well, Tim, part of a service economy is the idea that like you're like a construction services, for instance. Like we still produce a lot of housing in this country.
China doesn't need to buy services from us. Their labor is cheaper than ours.
Well, Tim, that's just the trade intensity of the economy. You still have this entire domestic economy that's based on not just services, but also you're still producing some things.
Let's go back to the main point I said. If the resources we need for those services to exist are produced by foreign countries for which we give them money. They don't need to buy our service from us because their labor is cheaper. What will they buy? We don't produce raw materials for the most part, so they're not going to buy from us. They don't need our service.
Wait, this is a complete the United States produces a lot of raw materials. Right?
Indeed, it does.
We do make a lot of intermediate goods and capital goods and things like that, right?
But we are a service and consumer economy, meaning the majority of what we're trading between ourselves is the services, not the raw materials. Steel plants have been closing across this country quite a bit. We call the Pittsburgh Steelers the Steelers because they made steel there. They don't make steel there anymore.
Well, Tim, circle this back to the welfare state. We've gone a little bit far flung here.
The point is this.
Yeah, what's the point?
The value of the economy is being extracted, and we're not going to be able to maintain a welfare state when our assets are being bought off our backs because we don't produce anything anymore.
Well, no. Okay, I get the misunderstanding now. So no, just because you trade, that doesn't mean that value is being extracted from your economy. Obviously, when people buy things from other countries, they're assuming that there's some value added to buying those products, right? So they might sell raw materials, but we use those materials to whatever. Like we ship lumber in from Canada, we use that to build a house, right? So
what can China buy from us if their labor is cheaper than ours and they're producing largely our raw materials?
Well, you can look up what China buys from the United States.
They're buying our land.
Well, they don't just buy land, obviously.
Yes, but
they buy
they're
a lot of
buying
intermediate goods. They buy services from us.
Corporate securities, control of our corporate systems, our land, our hard assets. If you don't produce things to trade, which we are producing, which we are not producing to keep up with the consumer economy, you will end up with them buying your hard assets from you.
Okay, so if you'll indulge me,
sure,
Econo Boy. So I think that this is, even if you think that it's all going to be okay, it's all going to come out in the wash, et cetera, there is an underlying anxiety of the American economy, which is, what is the American economy actually backed by? Now, this is a mistake that I actually think Trump makes, so, throwing a little shade to the right, is that the main thing that we do is services, and we also do defense. We are the American, we are, for better or worse, the world police.
Quick
so when
side
I
note,
see, yep.
Trump did brag famously that we were selling weapons to Saudi Arabia in exchange for lots of money, good for our economy.
Based. So anyways, but the point is, so this is actually where I get frustrated with the Trump admin, though, because they're effectively saying, we don't need soft power. Why do we need to be involved in East Africa? We don't need soft power. Why are we involved in West Africa, Asia, whatever?
Because we're talking about the welfare state here.
Yeah. We will move back to it. I just want to make this point because I think it's important.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Culture War podcast. We're live every Friday, 10 a.m. to noon. So subscribe and come hang out.